Okay, Tom, we bumped you, but the new man of the half hour is Tom Wolfe. And I don't really feel like he needs an introduction, but at the same time, we're going to introduce him again. So Agrimetrix Research and Training, he's a spray application specialist based in Saskatoon. He grew up, again, questioning the grown-up part from a few of you, on a farm in Manitoba, studied agriculture at the U of M, BSA, and an MSc, then went to Ohio State University for a PhD, has 35 years of research experience in spray technology, starting with AFC in '89 and now as a private consultant. With Jason DeVoe, Tom now hosts and writes for the world's #1 sprayer website. Stiff competition out there, but sprayers101.com. He is past president and fellow of the Canadian Weed Science Society, has been named Distinguished Agrologist with the Saskatchewan Institute of Agrology, and I'm sure there's got to be some unicycle award that you've won as well. No further ado, Tom Wolfe.
Thank you, Chad. Is this good? I'll you know what, I'll hold this, it's better. Thank you, Tammy, for the introduction. I just want to acknowledge that you are indeed making me nervous. I know what's coming. Great to be here. And, you know, being asked to speak to herbicide resistance as a spray application specialist is sort of akin to asking a smoker to talk about lung health. The best possible thing that we could do about herbicide resistance is to stop spraying herbicides. Because every time we spray, we apply selection pressure, and that's a truth that you can't circumvent. So I've struggled with this, trying to make this a presentation that actually has some utility for you. I'm not living in a dream world. But I'd like to pose a question for you. And the question is, what do you think is the most powerful force in the universe? It's a bit of a joke question. I don't want any serious answers, but are there any suggestions about what a powerful force might be that you respect, that you're afraid of maybe? What would that be? Profit. Sorry, what was that? Profit. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I like that. It's a driving force, a very important driving force for our decision making. Any others? Water? Yeah, it's the River Valley. I grew up in the valley. I grew up in Brunkhild. Okay, so I know water. Anybody else? That's a great one. Mother Nature. I have to tell you a little bit of biography. I once ran for public office. And what I learned there was the status quo was a really powerful force. But the one I really want to talk about this morning is creeping incrementalism. Some people call that compound interest. Small changes that are small enough to ignore that accumulate over time. And that is herbicide resistance. Because I was there when we saw Rob's timeline this morning. 85, I worked at the then Portage La Prairie Research Farm with Elmer Stobie and Ian Morrison, and Ian Heap was there. And we talked about group 3 resistance, and Ian Heap found the group 4 resistant wild mustard when I was working there. And it's 40 years ago, right? And things have moved. And so I would say it's not the size of a change that matters, it's the direction. And that is our task, is to always look at trends. One of the gifts of being maybe a sentient being or something is that we can look at trend lines and we all see the Ian Heap graphs and their lines are all going up. So predicting the future is difficult, but we can certainly look at trends and we can have a reasonably good idea what the future holds from those trends. And it's the direction of those trends that we have to pay attention to. I don't care how big the step is, I really don't care. We're taught in statistics that when we have a quantitative variable, we use regression. The step size does not matter. The rate on the x-axis matters. That's time. Okay, so things are moving, and I'm gonna try to, on Monday I listened to the realagriculture.com, and I tuned in because Bob Hartzler was there from Iowa, retired Iowa State, and Brianne Tideman. We talked about difficult to control weeds, or they did, and it was a really good session. Some of you might have listened in. And what Bob said was Palmer has been replaced in Iowa by water hemp. Palmer was all the rage 5-10 years ago. Everybody was afraid and should be. But water hemp has become the new problem weed. And this is the theoretical range map of Palmer, and it basically means, it can grow anywhere, apparently not so much in spruce woods. But anyway, it seems to be adapted anywhere, and I think same goes true for water hemp. It's just a question of time, isn't it? It's really just a question of time. Okay, so the question that we've been asking in my world, and I've gone to herbicide resistance meetings posted by industry, is how can we get more innovative with our herbicides, right? We're remixing them, we're adding more active ingredients, but they're not new modes of action. And I think that's the wrong question. The question should be, which cultural practices best supplement or replace herbicides? Which cultural practices? We just heard about successful organic agriculture. I was talking to Martin Ince during the break. He talked about the new grant he's received to study some of these cultural ecosystem things, and that's the direction. That's where we have to go. And the question in the meantime, because we're not there, is what can we do to prolong the utility of herbicides? Prolong, not forever, but prolong the utility of herbicides. I think that should be the question. In the short term, it's a stopgap, right? Because I don't know. I can see the future. I don't know when it'll come here, but I think we all have that benefit. So I'm going to focus on something called polygenic resistance. Polygenic resistance is a resistance that is a creeping kind of resistance. It's not a site of action mutation, but rather it's the gradual, incremental, accumulation of traits that give a plant slightly better tolerance to herbicide until it becomes resistant. And there's a really good paper written by Panna Teranchian, who is in Jason Norsworthy's lab, and I think it was Rob or Martin had a paper by Jason Norsworthy earlier today, and this is another class. Yeah, you did, Martin, yes. And it's a really good one. So what they did is they want to demonstrate how quickly you can have a non site of action developed resistance to dicamba in Palmer. And what they did is they chose a completely susceptible population, and they applied a dose response of dicamba and 2,4-D to it, and they were looking for survivors. They were looking for that rate where some just survive. So they were slightly more tolerant than others. And then they reared those to maturity, harvested the seed, and then allowed them to cross with others before they harvested the seed, and then planted their progeny. Did a dose response, looked for survivors, planted the progeny of those, looked for survivors 3 times. In 3 generations of doing this, they found a 3-fold increase in the GR50 of that population. Okay, that's not actually creeping, that's racing incrementalism. But it tells you that it doesn't have to be, you're not actually selecting for a pre-existing gene here, you're just accumulating many traits. And this is something that happens in outcrossing species, so dioecious plants like water hemp palmer, but also epigenous, or I forget what the proper term is for kochia, which is an obligate outcrosser because of the differential timing of the pollen release to the receptors. Dose response, let's have a quick look at dose response. They all look like this. We're on the y-axis, we have weed biomass, we have rate, and we have easy and difficult to control. We have GR50s here, and we all know about these, and our label is out here. So we have a lot of room to move. It's built in, right? And of course, when we have true resistance, it's out there, and there's nothing we can do with rate. There's nothing we can do with application method. You can apply that. Can you apply something 10 times more efficiently? I don't think so. There's absolutely nothing we can do. We've selected for it, and basically, the racehorse has left the stable, okay? But we can do something about polygenic. So here's an example of what a variable herbicide application looks like. This is actual data. We sprayed a square meter, believe it or not, and did 64 samples out of it, and just looked at the variation within that square meter. And so you can see that a number of different places in that receive different doses. Now let's apply that to a dose response curve. I want to show you what the negative impact of a variable deposit is. So if we chose a single rate like this rate here, we would expect to have this weed biomass as a result. Okay, that's dose response, and that can vary. If we applied the exact same average rate, but with a variable application method, what is our biomass? Is it the same because the average is the same? You win some, you lose some. And the average is that there's a greater penalty for a reduced dose than you have a benefit for a greater dose. And that's because we're at the inflection point of a sigmoidal curve. It gets steeper the further you go to the lower dose. So you underdose, you pay a huge penalty. You overdose, you don't get a great amount of benefit. And so the average amount of weed control we can observe with a variable dose is actually lower, even though the rate is exactly the same. Okay? So we get something like this. And that's kind of illustrated just with an application method thing. Jason and I, in Spurgeon 101, we were in Ontario a few years ago, and we just sprayed some dye on some snow. It was a bit of serendipity with the weather. And just to illustrate just how variable an application can be, booms too high, too low, that kind of a thing, and just right. So just to illustrate what that looks like. And I want to quickly now, with my time remaining, go through 4 things that we can do as agronomists, as advisors, as farmers, to maybe prolong or delay the onset of this polygenic resistance. So the first one is poor application. We want to talk about variable and low retention, talk a little bit about water quality as well. If we have a canopy and we spray into that canopy, we have to get to the weeds that are at the bottom of this canopy. Here we can't even see the ground. This would still be a stage we could probably spray at, right? It's tillering, maybe just before elongation. So herbicides are sometimes often safe even at that late stage. Yield loss may have already occurred. But this is not that canopy, but it just illustrates when we go into canopies, we have very rapid attenuation of the dose. Okay, so plants are basically shading other plants, crop is shading weeds, and the weeds are just simply not receiving the dose that we intend to give them. Okay. Also, we found that if you look at the variability of the deposit that we get on these weeds, the variability at depth also increases. So they are both lower and more variable. And so that means spraying early when the canopy is more open gives you an advantage in terms of coverage. The other issue is the weed type that we have. So if we look at this grassy weed, that was green foxtail, but we look at oats in this example, significantly less overall retention of spray per gram of plant biomass. Okay, this is dry weight, microliters of spray per gram of dry weight, very, very significant. And then we superimpose on that spray quality. So if we have a broadleaf weed, easy to wet, your spray quality is pretty flexible. We don't really have a strong penalty for going coarse. But with a grassy weed, we have a very strong penalty for going coarse. And so we have to be very mindful about what we're trying to achieve here. We are essentially pushing our system back into a slightly finer systems to get that better coverage and possibly get that better kind of penetration as well. So those are issues. Briefly, water quality. Surface waters are very common in the river valley and elsewhere because we just have a lot of salinity in our groundwaters, but when we do use groundwaters, we don't have the option for surface waters. I just want to review very, very quickly. I think most of you know this already. The hard water cations obviously can bind to the weak acid herbicides, and they will then modify their ability to bind to the site of action. And it could be magnesium, calcium, could also be sodium, could be iron, could be potassium. Okay, so there's the 5 metal cations that are involved. Of those, iron is far the most powerful, but calcium and magnesium follow short, and sodium and potassium not as bad. And the basic recommendation for it is ammonium sulfate. That's the cheapest, most effective, most proven way of doing it. I was with Peter Sikkema a couple weeks ago teaching a herbicide mode of action course in Ontario. And he maintains that adding more herbicide is actually cheaper than adding ammonium sulfate. So as long as it's within the label and it's a budget decision, but it's certainly something you can overcome with a herbicide rate. What happens is, it's very cool, the sulfate associates with the hard metal cation, it forms an insoluble precipitate, it's no longer available. The ammonium actually weakly binds to the herbicide. And it actually facilitates transmembrane transport through ion trapping. Right. Look up ion trapping, it's a very cool thing. It actually is known to benefit. Did you learn it in weed science? I learned it in this room in weed science in the 80s. So it's an existing real thing. So that's one of the reasons that ammonium sulfate improves the performance of herbicides, not always hardness. And that's one of the reasons that sometimes UAN is on some labels. Okay, so it has ammonium, like AMS, it doesn't have sulfate. So not good for hard water, but good for those other things. Okay, so let's recap. Let's recap number one. Why does early weed removal result in better control? Well, which one of these is true? Maybe they're all true. Small weeds are easier to control, absolutely. The crop canopy is less dense, allowing easier weed targeting, yes. The spray deposit is more uniform, yes. And I would argue that time pressure is lower, getting ahead of the game, not getting yourself into a corner with weather and getting behind. Early removal, okay? Second one, turns, this one's easy. When we have a spray boom or any implement and we make a turn, the outside edge of that turn receives a lower dose because it's traveling faster. And our rate control is boom wide, okay? So when we have, for example, a 120-foot boom and a 60-foot diameter circle, we're underdosing the outer wing by about 40%. And that's true for seeding, it's true for spraying, anything you do. And the best way to solve that problem is with PWM. And PWM is basically a de facto normal feature on most modern sprayers, right? It's gone that far. It's been around. You know, I was made aware of PWM in 1994 with Ken Giles's bringing that to agriculture. So that is 30 years ago. If you apply PWM to this problem, you can unify with duty cycle the output of each individual nozzle. So each individual nozzle can have its flow adjusted within a window. And if you have, for example, permanent features in a field where you're making the same turn year after year after year after year, you're underdosing year after year after year after year the outside of that turn in the same location because the implement width is the same, you will probably develop some kind of rate-related issues in those spots. Because modern swath control shuts off boom sections when you want to respray that, so you can't even double spray it, okay? So let's recap that. That was a short one. Made up some time there. How does turn compensation do this? Okay, it increases spray pressure to the outside of the boom. Is that correct? No, spray pressure is, you have one pressure available across the whole boom, so you know that's not the answer. It turns off nozzles on the inside of the boom. It might if you turn it so tight that you're actually backing the boom up, but actually it can't do that either, okay? The duty cycle of the PWM solenoid changes the rate applied through each nozzle. That's what it is. You have to have a PWM capable solenoid. And the last one is it turns on larger or smaller nozzles along the boom. And that is also true. For some non-PWM systems, particularly coming in with the European sprayers, such as Horsch, they have a system, Amazon has a system like that as well, they're not selling sprayers here at the moment, where they will have a bank of 4 nozzles on each location where you can choose the rate of that section of the boom by turning on different combinations of these nozzles. So you actually have de facto turn compensation. So that's very cool. Boom stability, I quickly talk about that. Low booms are essential to making a uniform application. I think that's just absolute basics. And I always take pictures of sprayers when I see them. They're always nervous. So this guy kept spraying, which I thought was really good. I took about 100 pictures of his sprayer and none of them had a good boom shot. So it's not because it's a rogator, but it happens to the best of them, all right? But basically, we did some work just to illustrate this point, and we went to a very low boom, 16 inches, and we defined CV as 15% being acceptable, which is an industry standard, and you can see that majority were below that, but certainly there were some outliers, and that's because the boom just went too low, and we had striping. And then we went to a 32-inch boom height, which is very common in agriculture because of what I just showed, and we saw that there was indeed a better overall deposition because the boom sway was more accommodated, but we still had a problem with speed. So we saw a trend where higher speeds created a more variable deposits. Okay. I had the privilege of going on a trip to Europe, and we visited the Amazon factory with some Canadian farmers. And this is Timo Kleiman, he's the lead of application technology with that company. And he just jumped, they were on a bumpy track, he just jumped on the boom. And the boom said, I don't care. I don't care that you're on me. Well, they designed it for this. They designed the boom to be stable. And one of the things that they do, they all have these bumpy tracks. And in fact, if you were to go to a DLG field day in Europe somewhere, the sprayers would all be driven down bumpy tracks. And there would be thousands of farmers watching along each side of the bumpy track, and there'd be 10 or 20 sprayer manufacturers driving the bumpy track, and it is absolutely a treacherous public relations moment because there's hundreds of cameras going. And so at Ag in Motion, I'm trying to convince Ag in Motion to build a bumpy track and have sprayers do it, because why not? And those videos will live forever on the internet, and if you don't have a good boom, people are gonna know about it, right? And we're hiding behind brochures. Sorry?
I think that's why not.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly why they're not doing it. But they should. And so there is good competition from Europe where every company fears that DLG field day where they must go and they must demonstrate a stable boom over the DLG bumpy track. Okay? It's a standardized track, by the way. You could look it up. It tells you the frequency and the height of each bump. Okay. What about high booms? What's wrong with high booms? High booms increase wind displacement. That is true, and that's variable. Low booms decrease overlap and uniformity. That is also true, and that is variable. High booms create too much overlap. That is not true. You can have as much overlap as you want. It's too little overlap that matters. Too much, not a problem. High booms increase exposure to turbulence. Yes, they do. Okay, droplets have a longer time to move, and they have longer time to react negatively to turbulence. Okay. So low and consistent boom heights are a fundamental part of good application, and we are looking and asking our manufacturers to meet that challenge. Turbulence is another one, and I will talk about ground boom sprays real quick, but also briefly drones, because they're on their way. So we string across fields, and we drive across that string. It's a non-destructive sampler. You put a wheel over the string, and then after, when the boom sprays, it'll bounce back up. It's 4 inches above the ground, and then collect that spray. We cut it up, and we look at it and look at what it looks like. And this was funded by the Canola Council, and there's a report on the Canola Council website that you should look at if you want to see more of this. So this is one of the worst ones. This was a medium spray, so it's prone to displacement. So an R4045 sprayer. Went 18 miles per hour with a 40-inch boom height. Okay, and the deposit looked like that. It was actually really sobering to see this. And this is the average, the blue line, and the plus or minus 50% lines. And you can see the tremendous variability. I did not expect it to be that bad. What we did then, it takes weeks to analyze these, so we just went and did a few other things. But this is an 8 mile per hour travel speed with a 26-inch, I believe, boom height. We went low and slow, basically. And you know what? It's a little better, but it's not great. So there was a wind from the left. I want to just illustrate if you can see this. There was displacement. We're driving into the screen. There was displacement on the left side here, and it kind of bumped itself up here. It accumulated. And then we see the wheel tracks, the signature of the wheel tracks here and here. I saw that in probably 3/4 of our trials, signature of wheel tracks, lower deposit. And then we had some pretty good stuff down here. And we asked PAMI, we contacted them to do CFD, and they were able to do that. They modeled a sprayer and put different speeds through it and travel at different speeds. And it's a part of the report with lots more pictures like this. So we see kind of the turbulence signature of the wheels, even boom components, structural components. Basically, if we're going to go this fast, we're going to have to become more aerodynamic about it, okay? And so on and so forth. And then some drone stuff. This is a video that Jason DeVoe shared with me. As you know, Jason is he's an OMAFA weed specialist in Simcoe. This is just, they're doing a tar spot in corn in Ontario. I want you to see this. This is going to play again. Watch for the turbulence generated by that helicopter, okay? And what do you see? Do you see a lot of turbulence generated by that rotary wing? You'd think there would be some. This is a drone, okay? There's turbulence. And you know what? It can be good. The problem with turbulence is that it's really tough to control. Drones fly with GPS, so they fly at not airspeed but ground speed. So they're always trying to maintain their position by altering the frequency, the rotational speed of the various blades, and so it's a very variable flow field. This is the XAG P100 Pro, 40-liter tank. And so I took this video when I was in Simcoe working with Jason. This is a 5-gallon per acre application with rotary atomizers. And you can kind of see some of the things that are happening here. I mean, we didn't fly as fast as we should have maybe. We should have gone faster. But we just want to illustrate kind of the turbulence. Some of the deposits we're capturing, we've done this hundreds of times. This is a pretty good one. It's not terrible. It's not as bad as some of them. But if you think that drones are an answer to, in terms of applying herbicides, you're mistaken. They're a new problem. Okay, they're a new problem. And finally, I want to finish off with some AI stuff, and in the last few minutes that I have left, just to encourage technologies that allow this stopgap measure of using multiple effective modes of action tank mixes. Weeded spot sprays, you've seen it. It can detect small weeds. It's in use in Alberta primarily, but some in Saskatchewan. The green on green sprayers are capable of green on brown and green on green. This is the AIC Plus with Agrifac. There's a half dozen of them in Manitoba right now. And it basically has AI to see these weeds. And I think there's a bright future here. And Dilshan is working on a project with Rob on this as well. So my summary is, or my conclusions are, that's fine, I'm still going to conclude. We can maybe have questions or comments. Philosophical comments. I think spraying early with the correct spray quality. It's so fundamental. It's a fundamental agronomic practice. Spray quality is an agronomic tool because it allows you to spray at the right time. If it's windy early, a coarser spray will let you spray early. More water, because we have larger tanks and better handling systems, will allow you to spray more water volume. We have logistical answers to the early spraying problem, okay? You can use turn compensation technology to delay polygenic resistance. You can improve or look for sprayers that have better boom stability and basically drive at reasonable speeds. In the UK, Syngenta coined a phrase called low, slow, and covered. And basically they're saying, drive slow, have your boom low, and make sure your weeds are covered. And it's an unpopular message in today's world where we need to do 100 acres per hour because of time pressure, and a sprayer costs $1 million, and so you can't really own two anymore. So there is a speed issue with us, but we should try to delay it. And then finally, the spot sprays. I really do think that they will allow us to use multiple effective modes of actions affordably. That's really what it is. They're save you money, and you should reinvest that money in the future, right? Not for other things. The future. That's where that money should go. So I want to thank you again for having me here. Sprayers 101 is a free website. You know, once someone said it's number one sprayer website in the world, and Tammy's 100% correct. We don't have any competition.
But it's amazing.
But hopefully it's useful for you, and it's sponsored, by the way, by the Manitoba Crop Alliance. So thank you very much for that. Okay.
To your point, Tom, we don't need any competition because you've already got it all covered there. How about that?
Covered. I like that, coverage.
Pun not intended, but there we go. Okay, there is one online question.
Yeah, well, this one, can plant identification software identify individual weed species?
Yes, it can. It's really just a matter of the algorithm being trained, but there are already algorithms that have the major weed species in them, and they can differentiate. So it actually has a lot of potential uses. With direct injection, for example, you could target a specific weed species with a different dose, okay? Or maybe a different tank mix. You know, it would be a very complex machine, but that ability exists and is just improving all the time.
Is there any? I have one. Time for ones.
Hey Tom, thanks. You alluded to it at the beginning there, but I just think it's a good question for somebody who's so into the spraying side. If you had to choose some alternative IPM method, you know, we're dealing with herbicide-resistant kochia and wild oats specifically, what do you think you would turn to for those situations? Or would you kind of double down on the kind of your summary there at the end?
I'm a strong believer in, you know, and I got an agronomy degree from this university, so I'm first and foremost, I consider myself to be an agronomist. I came to spraying later, and my philosophy still resides firmly with cover cropping, intercropping, relay cropping, anything to keep the ground covered, provide competition to suppress the weeds. A well-established, intentional plant stand is your best herbicide, okay? And although we had a very good presentation by Matthew on organic agriculture, I'm just a little bit afraid of losing some of our direct seeding investment by resorting more to tillage. Although in the Red River Valley, I can see we might have a niche there. But it's this erosion issue.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Tom. We always appreciate you here. Your gift.